The vampire king watched Elena's credit card decline at the clinic's front desk. What she didn't know, he'd frozen every account tied to her name the moment his security detected the pregnancy test purchase. She turned toward the exit, and he stepped from the shadows with a cashier's check that would change everything. Elena's fingers refuse to cooperate as she fumbles with her wallet, the worn leather slipping against her sweaty palms while the card reader's red error message burns into her retinas like a brand of shame. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and fading blonde highlights, offers another sympathetic smile that makes Elena's stomach twist tighter because she knows what comes next. The polite explanation about payment policies, and the gentle suggestion to reschedule when her finances improve. Three women sit behind her in those uncomfortable plastic chairs that squeak with every nervous shift, their magazines forgotten, as they pretend not to watch Elena's humiliation unfold at the reception desk, and she can feel their eyes tracking her movements as she tries her debit card again, praying to any deity listening that somehow the numbers in her account have magically multiplied overnight. The machine beeps its rejection with mechanical indifference, the same sound it made 30 seconds ago when her world first started crumbling. And Elena's reflection in the card reader's black screen shows a face she barely recognizes, pale and hollow-eyed from weeks of anxiety and morning sickness that strikes at the most inconvenient moments. Her hands shake as she digs deeper into her wallet, past the crumpled receipts and expired coupons, searching for her credit card, even though she knows the balance hovers dangerously close to the limit. But desperation makes her try anyway, because $500 might as well be $5 million to someone who counts every penny and still comes up short at the end of each month. Behind the reception desk, medical charts rustle as staff members move with practiced efficiency through their daily routines, processing appointments and updating files while Elena's life hangs in the balance of declining payment methods. And the fluorescent lights overhead buzz with that persistent electrical hum that seems louder now in the suffocating silence of her financial crisis. She's been saving for months, working double shifts at Murphy's Diner, where the coffee burns bitter and the customers tip poorly, skipping meals until her jeans hang loose on her hips, selling her grandmother's antique jewelry piece by piece to strangers who haggled over sentimental value measured in dollars and cents. Every sacrifice led to this moment. This appointment she scheduled 3 weeks ago after staring at two pink lines on a pregnancy test that might as well have been a death sentence for her dreams. Because nursing school doesn't wait for single mothers who can't afford childcare, and student loans don't pause for babies who arrive at the worst possible time in a woman's carefully planned life. The pregnancy test still sits crumpled in the bottom of her purse, like evidence of her failure to control her own destiny. A reminder that one night of poor judgment with Jake from her anatomy class could derail everything she's worked toward since graduating high school with a scholarship that barely covered tuition, much less living expenses in a city where rent consumes paychecks and hope dies slowly under the weight of mounting bills. She mumbles an apology to the receptionist, her voice barely above a whisper as shame burns hot in her cheeks, and turns toward the glass doors where her reflection fractures into a dozen distorted versions of herself in the safety wire mesh, each fragment showing a different angle of defeat as she prepares to walk back into the world where $500 might as well be an impossible fortune. When something shifts in her peripheral vision and a shadow detaches itself from the corner where shadows shouldn't exist in a brightly lit medical office. The temperature drops several degrees as the vampire king, Adrian Blackthorne, steps forward with the fluid grace of a predator who has never known fear, his 6-foot frame cutting an imposing silhouette against the harsh fluorescent lighting that seems to dim in response to his presence, as if even artificial illumination recognizes something ancient and dangerous moving through the sterile corridors of modern medicine. His charcoal suit bears the tailored perfection that costs more than Elena's yearly rent, every seam and line crafted by hands that understand luxury as a birthright rather than an aspiration. and the cashier's check in his manicured hand bears more zeros than Elena has ever seen outside of lottery commercials. The numbers arranged in neat rows that represent more money than her family has earned across generations of honest labor. Miss Martinez, his voice carries the weight of centuries as it cuts through the clinic's ambient noise. Each syllable pronounced with the careful precision of someone who learned English when it sounded different on human tongues. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. And the words settle into Elena's bones with an authority that has nothing to do with volume, and everything to do with the power that radiates from him like heat from a forge. Elena's fight or flight response screams warnings through every nerve ending as her body recognizes something supernatural in his presence, though she can't name why her skin prickles with electric awareness, or why her heartbeat accelerates to a rhythm that feels dangerous in her current condition. And the rational part of her mind that earned straight A's in biology tries to catalog the impossible perfection of his features, while her instincts howl about predators and prey and the wisdom of running from things that move too smoothly to be entirely human. The receptionist's eyes glaze over with a distant, dreamy expression as Adrian's influence spreads through the waiting room like invisible smoke, her professional demeanor melting into something vacant and compliant as supernatural compulsion overrides decades of medical training and personal agency. And Elena watches in growing horror as the woman's face goes slack with the empty contentment of someone whose will no longer belongs to them. He extends the check toward Elena with movements that flow like water, each gesture choreographed by centuries of practice in appearing unthreatening while wielding absolute power. And the paper bears her name written in elegant script across the pay-to line, $5 million spelled out in numbers and words, with ink still wet from his Mont Blanc pen that probably costs more than most people earn in a month. The amount so staggering that her mind refuses to process it as real money rather than monopoly bills or movie props. The other patients in the waiting room freeze mid-breath as his thrall expands to encompass everyone within the clinic's walls, their magazines suspended in half-turned pages, and their conversations cut off mid-sentence as supernatural influence flows over them like a tide, leaving Elena as the only conscious observer of a scene that belongs in nightmares rather than medical offices, and she realizes with crystalline clarity that accepting his offer will bind her to a world she never knew existed, but can never unknow once the veil lifts from her eyes. Around them, the clinic continues its mechanical operations, air conditioning humming through hidden vents and computers processing data with electronic indifference. But the human element has been suspended like insects in amber, while Adrian waits for her response to an offer that represents either salvation or damnation, depending on perspective, and Elena stares at the check in his extended hand, while her reflection multiplies endlessly in the building's windows and glass surfaces, showing her 1,000 versions of the choice that will define the rest of her life, and possibly end it in ways she can't yet imagine, but somehow fears with the instinctive terror of prey, recognizing predator. And now's the time to stop and subscribe to our channel. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these tales travel across the world. Now let's continue. Adrian's penthouse stretches across the top 3 floors of the city's most exclusive tower, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view that transforms the bustling streets below into streams of light moving through geometric canyons of glass and steel, and Elena finds herself pressed against the cool surface of the glass barrier that separates her from a 60-story drop, while her mind struggles to process the impossible truth he's just revealed, with the casual tone of someone discussing weather patterns or stock market fluctuations. The baby growing inside her belongs to him, conceived during a night that exists in her memory as fragmented impressions and half-recalled sensations, like trying to remember a dream after waking, or grasping smoke with bare hands. And the more she concentrates on recovering those lost hours, the more her head throbs with pain that radiates from the base of her skull, where scar tissue marks the spot her injury began healing 3 months ago. She'd been walking home from Murphy's diner after a particularly brutal shift that ended near midnight, her feet aching in shoes worn thin from too many hours on linoleum floors, when shadows detached themselves from the alley between Maple Street and the old warehouse district, where streetlights flicker sporadically and the city's protective veneer wears dangerously thin after dark. Supernatural predators had cornered her with the patience of hunters who understood their prey's limitations, creatures whose true nature she glimpsed only in peripheral vision, before terror overwhelmed rational thought, and she remembers running until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, the sound of inhuman laughter echoing off brick walls, while footsteps that shouldn't exist pursued her through narrow passages where normal people never venture alone. Adrian had materialized from nowhere with violence that moved faster than her eyes could track, his intervention swift and decisive as he dispatched threats she couldn't properly see or understand, and the security footage he shows her now reveals the aftermath of that salvation. Grainy black and white images, capturing her genuine gratitude as she looked up at her rescuer with eyes wide from adrenaline, and something deeper stirring in the space between terror and relief. The head injury had occurred when one of the creatures flung her against a brick wall with supernatural strength, her skull connecting with mortar and stone in a collision that should have killed her, but somehow left only gaps in her memory and a scar hidden beneath her hairline, and those missing hours stretched like a chasm between the woman who walked home from work and the one who woke up in a hospital bed with no clear explanation for how she'd gotten there. But the footage continues playing across his wall-mounted screen, showing moments she can't remember where gratitude transforms into something electric and undeniable, her hand reaching for his face with a tenderness that speaks of connection transcending circumstance. And even through the security camera's limited perspective, their attraction blazes with intensity that makes her current confusion seem like willful blindness to obvious truth. The baby developing inside her carries DNA that defies medical understanding, half human and half vampire, in a combination that shouldn't be viable according to every scientific principle she learned in her pre-nursing courses. Yet the ultrasound images scattered across his mahogany coffee table show cellular development that progresses according to its own supernatural timeline. Adrian explains with clinical detachment that Dhampir children represent the rarest outcome of vampire-human relations, his bloodline producing offspring perhaps once every 2 centuries, when conditions align perfectly, and the human partner possesses genetic markers that occur in less than 1% of the population, markers that Elena carries despite having no knowledge of her unusual heritage until this moment when everything she believed about herself crumbles under the weight of impossible revelation. His previous wives had died in childbirth, their human bodies unable to withstand the supernatural demands of carrying vampire offspring to term, and he recites their names with the careful pronunciation of someone who has carried guilt across decades or centuries. Each death, a failure that haunts him despite his understanding that vampire nature makes such tragedies inevitable rather than preventable. Maria Elena Vasquez died 1847 after 3 days of labor that produced only suffering. Catherine Marie Thornfield died 1923 when the baby's supernatural strength tore through her body during delivery. Sarah Beth Montgomery died 1956 from blood loss that no human medicine could staunch when Dhampir claws emerged too early in the birthing process. And the list continues with dates that span more years than Elena's entire family tree, while Adrian's voice never wavers from that same measured tone that suggests he's recounted these tragedies countless times in the privacy of his immortal thoughts. But Elena possesses something different, blood type AB negative with genetic markers that suggest distant supernatural ancestry, perhaps a great-grandmother who carried fey blood, or a bloodline touched by magic so diluted it passed unnoticed through generations until manifesting in cellular compatibility that might allow her to survive what killed all the others who came before. The revelation hits her like ice water flooding her veins, the understanding that she's not entirely human despite a lifetime of mundane experiences and ordinary dreams. That somewhere in her family history runs a thread of otherness that makes her valuable beyond her own comprehension, and possibly doomed in ways she's only beginning to understand. Elena's initial revulsion at learning she carries the Vampire King's child gives way to desperate pragmatism as Adrian continues speaking, his voice painting pictures of futures both golden and terrible, depending on choices she must make within the next few minutes, while her entire worldview reshapes itself around supernatural realities that existed parallel to her normal life without her knowledge or consent. The $5 million represents merely the beginning of his offer, a down payment on arrangements that could transform not just her circumstances, but those of everyone she loves, because he's researched her family's situation with the thoroughness of someone who turns information into leverage and understands that desperation makes excellent motivation when properly applied to human decision-making processes. Her mother's cancer treatments drain their savings month by month, medical bills accumulating faster than insurance can process claims, and the experimental therapy that might save her life costs more than Elena's father could earn in 5 years of running his struggling restaurant, where customers have grown scarce and suppliers demand payment up front for deliveries that barely keep the kitchen operational. Adrian knows about her nursing school dreams deferred semester after semester as tuition increases outpace her ability to save, about student loan applications rejected due to her family's precarious credit rating, about the acceptance letter she received and couldn't accept because working full-time at Murphy's Diner provides just enough income to prevent homelessness, but not enough to pursue education that could change everything. All she has to do is carry the pregnancy to term under his protection, submit to medical monitoring that will ensure the best possible outcome for both mother and child, and accept that despite his resources and supernatural abilities, she may not survive the birth that could grant her family financial security beyond their wildest imagination, or leave them grieving a daughter who died for money they never needed before her sacrifice made wealth possible. His estate provides everything she could need during the pregnancy: medical care from specialists who understand supernatural physiology, security that will protect her from threats she can't yet imagine, and luxury that will make her final months comfortable regardless of what comes after. But the price includes isolation from everyone she loves and acceptance that her life now belongs to forces beyond human control or understanding. The contract he presents emerges from his jacket pocket with a flourish that speaks of preparation and certainty. Heavy parchment that feels ancient beneath her fingertips, despite the fresh ink that forms letters and clauses written in silver script that seems to shimmer with its own internal light source. Elena thinks of her father's tired eyes as he calculates bills against income every month, her mother's brave smile during chemotherapy sessions that leave her weak and nauseated, her own dreams of becoming a nurse practitioner who could help people while earning enough to lift her family from poverty that has defined their lives for as long as she can remember. The pen he offers weighs more than it should, its surface warm despite the penthouse's air conditioning. And as she signs her name in careful cursive across the designated line, she doesn't notice the binding spell that weaves itself through the elegant script with magic older than the city outside his windows. Supernatural forces that will enforce this agreement through means that transcend human legal systems and venture into realms where contracts carry the weight of cosmic law rather than merely earthly obligation. Adrian's eyes flash with relief that transforms his aristocratic features for just an instant, revealing vulnerability beneath centuries of careful control. And something deeper stirs in his expression as he watches her commit to a path that will either save them both or destroy everything they might have built together in a world where love and survival often demand impossible choices from those brave enough to reach for both. Adrian's estate stretches across 50 acres of meticulously maintained grounds, where ancient oak trees cast shadows over gardens that bloom in defiance of seasonal logic, their supernatural cultivation, producing roses that flower in winter snow and jasmine that releases its fragrance only under moonlight, while protective wards hum through the air, with a frequency just below human hearing that makes Elena's teeth ache whenever she ventures too close to the property's perimeter walls. The main house rises from the landscape like something transported from European nobility. Its Gothic revival architecture featuring stone gargoyles that seem to shift position when observed peripherally, and stained glass windows that depict scenes of mythological creatures engaged in eternal battles between light and shadow, their colored fragments casting rainbow patterns across marble floors, polished to mirror brightness that reflects distorted images of anyone brave enough to walk these halls after dark. Elena's suite occupies the entire East Wing's second floor, rooms that rival the luxury hotels she's seen in magazines, but never imagined experiencing firsthand, with a sitting area larger than her family's entire apartment, decorated in silk wallpaper and antique furniture that probably costs more than most people's annual salaries, while her bedroom features a four-poster bed carved from what appears to be a single piece of mahogany surrounded by curtains that flutter without any detectable breeze. The library attached to her quarters contains thousands of volumes in languages she recognizes, and dozens she doesn't. Leather-bound tomes that smell of age and secrets alongside modern medical texts that detail supernatural physiology, with diagrams that would terrify anyone unprepared for the reality of vampire anatomy. And she spends hours reading about Dhampir development, while trying to ignore the way certain books seem to whisper when she passes their shelves in the darkness between sunset and dawn. Her art studio overlooks the estate's formal gardens through floor-to-ceiling windows that provide panoramic views of sculptured hedges arranged in patterns that might be decorative or might represent some form of protective symbolism, complete with professional-grade easels and paints in colors that shimmer with metallic undertones, suggesting they contain elements not found in ordinary art supplies. Though Elena discovers her artistic attempts produce images she doesn't remember creating, sketches of faces that belong to people she's never met, but somehow recognizes from dreams that feel more like memories. The private balcony extends from her bedroom like a stone tongue tasting the night air, its ornate railings decorated with iron roses that bloom in perpetual metal perfection, while below the moonlit gardens reveal their true nature as pathways designed according to principles that have nothing to do with human aesthetics, and everything to do with channeling supernatural energies through carefully calculated geometric arrangements that pulse with power, visible only to those carrying vampire blood in their veins. But the windows throughout her suite refuse to open despite their apparent hinges and locks, sealed with mechanisms that resist her increasingly desperate attempts at manipulation, while fresh air arrives through hidden ventilation systems that maintain perfect temperature and humidity, regardless of external weather conditions, creating an environment so carefully controlled that she begins to suspect even the oxygen she breathes has been filtered and measured, according to some supernatural standard designed to optimize Dhampir development rather than maternal comfort. The doors require keycards she doesn't possess, their electronic locks responding only to specific frequencies embedded in plastic rectangles that Adrian and his staff carry like talismans of freedom, and Elena's attempts to leave her suite without permission result in gentle but implacable resistance from security systems that monitor her location through sensors embedded in walls and ceilings, with technology that surpasses anything she's encountered in the human world. Cameras track her every movement through lenses so small they're barely visible, their electronic eyes following her progress from room to room, while recording data that streams to monitoring stations she's never seen, but knows must exist somewhere within the estate's labyrinthine structure, and she develops the uncomfortable certainty that even her most private moments occur under observation by individuals whose loyalty to Adrian supersedes any concern for her personal dignity or autonomy. Dr. Raina Voss arrives each morning with the punctuality of someone whose existence spans centuries rather than decades. Her ageless features and silver hair, suggesting vampiric longevity, while her clinical detachment transforms prenatal care into something resembling scientific experimentation conducted on willing but expendable subjects, and she speaks of Elena's pregnancy with the same emotional investment most people reserve for discussing weather patterns or stock market fluctuations. The baby's development defies every principle Elena learned in her prenatal anatomy courses. Growth patterns that compress normal gestational timelines, while brain activity scans reveal neural development occurring at rates that should be impossible according to human medical understanding, and the monitoring equipment frequently malfunctions in ways that suggest electromagnetic interference generated by the developing Dampier's supernatural nature, rather than mechanical failure of sophisticated diagnostic tools. Energy readings spike beyond the capacity of sensors designed to measure human biological functions, creating data patterns that Dr. Voss catalogs with the enthusiasm of a researcher documenting previously unknown phenomena, while Elena experiences the physical reality of carrying something that grows stronger and more alien with each passing day. Its movements inside her body generating sensations that have nothing to do with normal fetal activity and everything to do with supernatural strength, testing the limits of human anatomy. Elena's own body changes with disturbing rapidity as the pregnancy progresses, her senses sharpening until she can hear conversations occurring 3 floors below her suite and smell the emotional states of people passing through corridors she's never seen, while her physical strength increases to levels that allow her to crack marble surfaces with casual gestures that should require tools and significant effort from normal human beings. Most disturbing of all, she develops cravings for rare meat that contradict her lifelong vegetarian principles, her body demanding protein sources that her conscious mind rejects even as her supernatural pregnancy overrides dietary choices with biological imperatives that transform her into someone she doesn't recognize when faced with plates of barely cooked beef that smell like salvation rather than the animal cruelty she's always opposed. Marcus Chen becomes an unexpected source of friendship in a world where Elena lacks allies or confidants. His position as Adrian's human security chief providing him with access to information and authority that makes him uniquely valuable as someone who understands both the supernatural hierarchy governing their world and the human perspective that Elena struggles to maintain while her body transforms in ways that distance her further from her original species with each passing week. His own daughter had died in a vampire attack 15 years earlier, killed by creatures who viewed human children as convenient feeding sources during territorial disputes between rival courts, and he sees Elena's pregnancy as an opportunity to provide protection he couldn't offer his own family when supernatural politics destroyed everything he'd worked to build in his previous life as a Detroit police detective. Through conversations conducted in whispered tones during her supervised walks through the estate's gardens, Marcus explains the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that govern supernatural society, vampire courts that maintain territories across continents, while werewolf packs control rural regions through agreements that date back centuries, and the fragile peace that Adrian maintains as one of 5 ruling vampire kings whose decisions affect millions of supernatural beings living hidden within human civilization. The other kings view Adrian's Dampier offspring as either a threat to established power structures or an opportunity to claim influence through the child's unique nature, their political maneuvering creating currents of danger that swirl around Elena's pregnancy with increasing intensity as news of her condition spreads through supernatural communication networks that operate beyond human detection or interference. And Marcus warns her that protecting one pregnant human requires constant vigilance against threats that could manifest without warning from enemies who possess centuries of experience in eliminating inconvenient obstacles to their ambitions. Sarah Mitchell arrives at the estate on a Tuesday evening, when autumn rain transforms the gardens into impressionist paintings viewed through water-streaked windows, her presence announced by staff members who speak in hushed tones about the significance of receiving someone whose own Dampier pregnancy ended in survival for the mother, but death for the child whose supernatural nature proved too powerful for human anatomy to sustain beyond the moment of birth. She carries herself with the careful movements of someone whose body has been broken and rebuilt, her eyes holding shadows that speak of losses too profound for normal grief, while her knowledge of Dampier development comes from direct experience rather than clinical observation or theoretical study. And she seeks out Elena with the determination of someone who understands the importance of sharing warnings that might prevent another woman from walking blindly toward a fate that destroys everything it promises to preserve. Sarah's stories about Adrian's obsessive nature reveal a pattern of behavior that extends far beyond romantic attachment into territory that resembles possession disguised as protection. His previous relationships ending in death or madness, when women couldn't adapt to the supernatural demands of loving someone whose vampiric nature transforms affection into something consuming and ultimately destructive to human psychology. And she plants seeds of doubt about Elena's situation that grow stronger with each passing day as she observes the subtle ways her freedom has been curtailed in the name of care and security. Meanwhile, Lilith Ravencrest's arrival at the estate occurs without invitation or advance notice. Her dramatic entrance during a dinner party meant to introduce Elena to supernatural society, revealing the depth of her jealousy and the scope of her political ambitions that view Adrian's potential heir as either a tool to be controlled or a threat to be eliminated before it can challenge established power dynamics within vampire hierarchy. And her presence transforms Elena's carefully controlled environment into something infinitely more dangerous as ancient rivalries resurface, with the intensity of barely contained violence. Elena discovers that the mansion's silence carries different weights at different hours, with 3 a.m. bringing a particular stillness that seems to press against her skin like velvet as she pads barefoot through corridors lined with portraits of Adrian's ancestors, their painted eyes following her movement through shadows that dance with moonlight, filtering through tall windows, whose glass bears etchings of protective symbols she's learning to recognize. Sleep eludes her most nights now, as the baby's supernatural nature disrupts her natural rhythms, creating a schedule that aligns more with vampire nocturnal preferences than human circadian cycles, and she finds herself drawn to the library where Adrian often retreats when his own immortal insomnia becomes too heavy to bear alone. Despite her initial fear that calcified during those first weeks, when every interaction felt like walking through a minefield of supernatural power and ancient authority, Elena finds herself genuinely curious about the man who speaks 7 languages fluently, but struggles to express simple emotions, who commands absolute obedience from creatures that could tear apart armies, but flinches when she moves too quickly in his peripheral vision, as if expecting rejection or attack from the woman carrying his child. Their late-night conversations begin accidentally when she discovers him standing motionless in his study at 4 in the morning, staring at a chessboard where the pieces haven't moved in weeks, and her tentative question about whether he plays leads to revelations that pour from him like water through a broken dam, centuries of loneliness spilling across the space between them with raw honesty that strips away his carefully maintained facade of invincible authority. He tells her about the weight of ruling beings who measure time in centuries rather than decades, making decisions that affect thousands of vampires across multiple continents, while knowing that one mistake could trigger wars that would spill supernatural violence into the human world. And she begins to understand that his commanding presence masks a bone-deep exhaustion that comes from carrying responsibility for an entire species on shoulders that have borne that burden for longer than most civilizations have existed. The genuine terror in his voice when he speaks of losing another child resonates through their supernatural bond with such intensity that Elena feels it echo in her own chest, his fear transforming from abstract concept to lived experience as their connection deepens with each passing week of pregnancy. And she realizes that beneath his vampire king exterior beats the heart of a man who has buried too many possibilities for happiness and refuses to hope for survival, because hope makes loss more devastating than resigned acceptance of inevitable tragedy. Their relationship shifts from the rigid captor-captive dynamic that defined those early weeks to something more complex and undefined. When Elena finds him one night gripping the edges of his desk with supernatural strength that leaves finger-shaped indentations in solid mahogany, his usual composure shattered by nightmares that replay the deaths of his previous wives with vivid detail that centuries haven't dimmed. She approaches him slowly, ignoring the warnings that whisper through her heightened instincts about dangerous predators and wounded animals. And when her hand settles on his shoulder, the tension melts from his frame like ice touched by flame, his centuries of careful control crumbling under the simple comfort of human touch offered without expectation or agenda. The supernatural bond between them strengthens as her pregnancy progresses into the second trimester, creating connections that transcend normal human experience as they begin sharing emotions across the psychic link that formed the moment his child took root in her womb, her contentment soothing his restless energy, while his protective instincts wrap around her consciousness like armor forged from pure devotion. She discovers that her presence calms his more violent impulses in ways that surprise them both, her touch acting like a supernatural sedative that can pull him back from the edge of rage when vampire politics threaten to overwhelm his carefully maintained diplomatic restraint. And he admits with wonder in his ancient voice that no one in his long existence has possessed such power over his nature without using magic or compulsion to achieve dominance through supernatural means. But physical intimacy remains fraught with dangers that grow more pronounced as her body changes to accommodate their Dhampir child, his vampire nature threatening to overwhelm her humanity when desire builds between them like electricity seeking ground. And the baby reacts to his presence with increased activity that borders on painful for Elena, as supernatural energy courses through her nervous system in waves that leave her breathless and shaking. The other vampire kings view Elena's pregnancy through the lens of political opportunity and supernatural threat, their networks of spies and informants tracking every development in her condition, while they calculate how a living Dhampir heir might shift the balance of power that has kept their territories stable for the past 2 centuries. King Damien of the Eastern Court arrives with fanfare, befitting a diplomatic mission. His entourage of vampires, disguised as cultural attachés and trade representatives, while their true purpose involves assessing Elena's vulnerability and determining whether Adrian's potential heir represents opportunity to be seized or threat to be eliminated before birth can complicate existing power structures. Damien's public offers of protection mask private conversations with Adrian's rivals, careful words that dance around treasonous suggestions while planting seeds of doubt about Adrian's fitness to rule when personal attachment might compromise his judgment in matters affecting vampire security across multiple kingdoms. Meanwhile, a faction of vampire purists, led by Lord Victor, Adrian's own council member, whose loyalty runs deeper to ideology than personal allegiance, believes that Dhampir children represent abominations that weaken vampire genetic purity and dilute the supernatural gifts that have kept their species dominant over lesser creatures for millennia. Victor's aristocratic bearing and impeccable political credentials mask a fanatic's devotion to vampire supremacy. His belief that mixing vampire blood with human genetics creates inferior offspring that will eventually lead to species extinction if such unions become acceptable or common among their kind. He begins recruiting allies from among the older vampires who remember when humans existed purely as food sources rather than potential partners, gathering support for his position that Elena's pregnancy represents not miracle, but catastrophe that must be prevented through any means necessary, including assassination disguised as medical complications. The conspiracy takes shape in whispered conversations held in locations warded against Adrian's supernatural senses, Victor's persuasive arguments convincing fence-sitting council members that eliminating Elena serves the greater good of vampire survival, and he reaches beyond vampire politics to recruit human hunters who specialize in supernatural targets, mercenaries whose knowledge of vampire weaknesses could prove decisive in penetrating Adrian's defenses. Elena overhears fragments of their conspiracy during a council session she's not supposed to attend, her enhanced hearing picking up conversations conducted in languages she doesn't understand, but whose hostile tone carries meaning that transcends linguistic barriers, and she realizes with crystalline clarity that her pregnancy has made her the center of supernatural politics, where her life and her child's existence represent chess pieces in games whose rules she barely comprehends. The knowledge that she can trust no one except Marcus, whose devotion to Adrian stems from genuine friendship forged across decades of shared battles, and Dr. Voss, whose loyalty runs deeper than political considerations, because she remembers when Adrian was young enough to need guidance rather than give commands, settles into Elena's consciousness like lead weights that make every interaction with other staff members feel potentially dangerous. She begins cataloging faces and voices of those who might wish her harm, learning to read micro-expressions and body language that might betray hostile intentions, while the baby inside her responds to her elevated stress levels with supernatural activity that reminds her constantly that she carries something precious and vulnerable in a world where power and survival often demand terrible sacrifices from those who dare to love across species boundaries. The estate that once felt like sanctuary transforms into a battlefield where every shadow might hide enemies and every smile might mask murderous intent, while Elena navigates pregnancy complications that have no precedent in medical literature and political intrigue that could determine whether her child lives to take its first breath or dies in the womb from violence aimed at preventing supernatural evolution that threatens the established order of their hidden world. The truth unravels like a tapestry pulled apart thread by thread when Elena enters Dr. Voss's laboratory unannounced and overhears a conversation between the vampire physician and Adrian's chief alchemist about procedures that should exist in her memory, but instead occupy blank spaces where her consciousness has been carefully edited with surgical precision, and the casual way they discuss blood modifications and hormone treatments that occurred while she slept reveals the scope of manipulation that extends far beyond the single night when supernatural predators cornered her in that alley 3 months ago. Dr. Voss mentions experimental therapies designed to increase Elena's survival chances with the clinical detachment of someone reviewing routine medical files, her voice carrying no awareness that the patient in question stands frozen in the doorway, listening to discussions of her own body being altered without consent or knowledge. And Elena's growing horror crystallizes into the understanding that everything she's felt for Adrian, every moment of tenderness and connection that seemed to bloom naturally between them, has been artificially enhanced through vampire compulsion, applied with the methodical precision of a master manipulator, who needed her calm and compliant for reasons that had nothing to do with her well-being, and everything to do with optimizing conditions for successful Dampier gestation. The realization hits her like ice water flooding her veins as she remembers inconsistencies that her conscious mind dismissed but her subconscious catalogued, moments when her emotional responses felt slightly disconnected from her rational thoughts, times when her attraction to Adrian seemed to surge beyond logical explanation, and conversations where her words emerged from her mouth, carrying opinions she didn't remember forming, but that aligned perfectly with Adrian's desires for a peaceful pregnancy, uncomplicated by maternal stress or resistance to his protective restrictions. Her memories, the very foundation of her identity and decision-making process, have been selectively edited like a film stripped of inconvenient scenes, leaving her with highlights that paint Adrian in the most favorable light possible, while erasing evidence of his more controlling tendencies or moments when her natural instincts might have warned her about the true cost of accepting his protection. And she understands with crystalline clarity that the woman who signed that supernatural contract was operating with incomplete information about her own emotional state and motivations. Adrian's justification when she confronts him in his study flows from his lips with the smooth eloquence of someone who has rehearsed these explanations, His argument that he needed her calm and cooperative for the baby's developmental health, containing enough medical truth to sound reasonable while disguising the fundamental violation of her autonomy that transforms consent into a carefully orchestrated illusion. He speaks of vampire compulsion as if it were a medical treatment rather than mental rape, his centuries of experience allowing him to present manipulation as protection, while his ancient eyes hold just enough genuine concern to make Elena question her own anger, even as fury builds in her chest, like a volcanic pressure that threatens to explode beyond her ability to control or contain. The violation feels deeper than physical assault because it strikes at the core of her sense of self. The knowledge that her feelings and choices have been artificially influenced, making her doubt every decision she's made since entering his world. And she wonders with sick fascination how much of her personality remains authentically hers versus carefully crafted modifications designed to make her the perfect vessel for his supernatural offspring. Elena's rage triggers something unprecedented, as her emotional state reaches a breaking point that resonates through the psychic bond connecting her to the developing Dampier, the baby's supernatural nature responding to maternal distress, with power that manifests outside the confines of her womb for the first time since conception began this impossible journey. Electromagnetic disturbances ripple through the estate's sophisticated security systems as lights flicker and electronic locks cycle randomly, while the surveillance cameras that monitor her every movement begin displaying static patterns that pulse in rhythm with her accelerated heartbeat, and she realizes with wonder and terror that her unborn child possesses abilities that dwarf anything she's read about Dampier development in the medical texts that fill Adrian's library. The manifestation of power serves as a warning and a promise, revealing that the baby growing inside her will not be the controllable heir that vampire politics expects, but something entirely new and potentially uncontainable. A supernatural force that could reshape the balance of power between species if it survives to maturity, and Elena understands that her pregnancy has become the focal point of forces larger than personal relationships or family dynamics. Using knowledge gleaned from conversations with Marcus and her own developing supernatural senses that grow stronger with each passing week of pregnancy, Elena begins planning her escape during the chaos of a state dinner meant to honor visiting vampire dignitaries whose political agendas include assessing the stability of Adrian's kingdom in light of his controversial relationship with a human woman. The formal gathering provides perfect cover for her attempt, as Adrian's attention focuses on diplomatic necessities that require his presence in the main dining hall, leaving the estate's security systems operating on automated protocols that she's learned to predict and circumvent through careful observation of guard rotations and camera blind spots that Marcus inadvertently revealed during their walks through the gardens. She moves through corridors with the stealth of someone whose enhanced senses can detect approaching footsteps from considerable distances. Her supernatural hearing, allowing her to track guard movements, while her improved night vision reveals details in shadows that would have been invisible to her human eyes just months earlier. And the developing Dampier seems to understand her intentions, as it remains unusually quiet within her womb, as if conspiring with her escape attempt. The estate's perimeter walls loom ahead like the boundaries of her prison, their height and supernatural wards representing the final obstacle between captivity and freedom. When Adrian's presence explodes into her consciousness through their psychic bond, with the force of a thunderclap that nearly sends her stumbling to her knees as his vampire speed carries him across the grounds faster than human eyes could track. Their confrontation in the moonlit gardens becomes a battle of wills that transcends physical capability as Elena's human determination collides with Adrian's vampire desperation. Her refusal to return to gilded captivity, meeting his terror of losing both her and their child in a clash that sends supernatural energy crackling through the air between them like visible lightning. She stands her ground, despite knowing that his centuries of combat experience and supernatural strength make physical resistance futile. Her fury lending her courage that borders on recklessness as she faces down a creature who could tear apart armies but trembles at the thought of her walking away from their twisted relationship built on manipulation and control, disguised as protection and love. Adrian approaches her with movements that flow like liquid shadow, his usual predatory grace tempered by something that might be respect for her determination to escape, even when success seems impossible. And his voice carries genuine anguish as he pleads for her understanding, while acknowledging that his methods crossed lines that cannot be uncrossed and violated trust that may be impossible to rebuild. The stress of their confrontation triggers changes in Elena's body that feel like labor beginning weeks too early, pain shooting through her abdomen with supernatural intensity that doubles her over while the baby responds to her distress with movements that feel more like internal combat than normal fetal activity. And she realizes with growing horror that the escape attempt may cost both their lives if the premature birth occurs without proper medical support. Adrian's vampire senses detect the change in her condition immediately, his political concerns and relationship dynamics becoming irrelevant in the face of medical emergency that threatens everything he's worked to protect, and his supernatural speed carries her to the estate's medical wing while Dr. Voss mobilizes equipment designed specifically for Dampier pregnancies that occur perhaps once in a generation. The near loss strips away Adrian's carefully maintained control as he watches Elena struggle with contractions that rack her body with pain, designed for supernatural rather than human physiology. His ancient composure cracking under the weight of potentially losing both mother and child, due to his own failure to balance protection with respect for her autonomy, and his willingness to grant her complete freedom if it means keeping them both alive, emerges from his lips like a vow sworn on sacred ground. The depth of his feelings, previously hidden beneath layers of political calculation and vampire pragmatism, blazes across their psychic connection with such intensity that Elena feels the genuine love buried beneath centuries of learned manipulation, and she understands that his controlling behavior stems not from callous disregard for her humanity, but from trauma-induced terror of loss that has shaped every relationship he's attempted since his previous wives died, bearing his children centuries ago. The aftermath of Elena's escape attempt transforms the dynamic between them, like a forge reshaping metal under intense heat, creating something entirely different from the original material as Adrian strips away every supernatural influence he's woven through her consciousness over the months since their first meeting, the process requiring painstaking precision to untangle compulsion from genuine emotion while ensuring that removing his psychic manipulations doesn't damage her mind or alter her fundamental personality beyond recognition. Elena feels the difference immediately, as her thoughts clear of the artificial contentment that had muffled her natural skepticism and survival instincts. Her authentic self, emerging from beneath layers of vampire-induced compliance, like a sculpture revealed through careful removal of excess stone, and she realizes with both relief and trepidation that her feelings for Adrian must now develop or dissolve based purely on their actual interactions, rather than supernatural enhancement of emotional responses. Their new partnership requires negotiations that feel more like treaty discussions between sovereign nations than romantic reconciliation, with Elena establishing boundaries that acknowledge her continued pregnancy, while asserting her right to participate in all decisions affecting her child's future, rather than remaining a passive vessel whose only role involves carrying the baby to term without troubling herself about political implications or long-term consequences. She agrees to remain at the estate and see the pregnancy through to its conclusion, but only under conditions that grant her complete autonomy over her own choices and guarantee her inclusion in strategic planning sessions where vampire kings typically exclude human perspectives as irrelevant to supernatural governance. And Adrian accepts these terms with the humility of someone who understands that his previous methods nearly cost him everything he's fought to protect across centuries of careful alliance building and political maneuvering. Together, they begin preparing comprehensive defenses against the multiple threats that circle the estate, like wolves sensing wounded prey. Elena's outsider perspective proving invaluable as she identifies vulnerabilities in security protocols designed by vampires who think in terms of supernatural threats while overlooking weaknesses that human attackers might exploit using conventional weapons and tactics. Her suggestions about reaching out to Dampier communities that Adrian has previously ignored as politically insignificant reveal networks of support that could prove crucial during the approaching crisis. Hidden enclaves of half-vampire children who survived their births and grew into adults capable of understanding the unique challenges facing their potential sibling while possessing abilities that bridge the gap between human and vampire capabilities. The Dampier network spans continents through underground communication systems that operate beyond vampire political control. Communities of individuals who exist in the spaces between species boundaries while maintaining connections to both human and vampire societies. And Elena's outreach efforts create the foundation for support systems that could protect their child throughout a life that will inevitably involve navigating prejudice from multiple directions. Their renewed partnership kindles genuine love that grows from honest interaction rather than supernatural manipulation. Conversations that reveal Adrian's vulnerability beneath centuries of accumulated authority, while Elena's strength emerges through her refusal to be defined by either her human limitations or her supernatural pregnancy, and they discover that attraction based on authentic personalities creates deeper intimacy than anything compulsion could manufacture. But the approaching birth looms as a potentially insurmountable obstacle that no amount of planning or preparation can entirely eliminate. Medical texts offering no guarantees that Elena's unusual genetics will prove sufficient to survive the supernatural demands of Dampier delivery, when previous mothers with similar advantages died despite the best available care. And both she and Adrian must face the possibility that their love story might end in tragedy, regardless of their best efforts to write a different conclusion. Lord Victor's coup attempt culminates in a coordinated assault that demonstrates months of careful planning and resource allocation. His vampire insurgents, supported by human military contractors whose expertise in siege warfare transforms the estate's defensive advantages into liabilities as conventional weapons combine with supernatural abilities to create devastation that threatens to level the entire property along with everyone inside its protective boundaries. The timing of the attack during Elena's baby shower reveals Victor's ruthless calculation as he exploits a moment designed for celebration and vulnerability, turning what should have been a joyous gathering into a battlefield where vampire aristocrats who came to offer gifts and political support find themselves fighting for survival against enemies who view their very existence as obstacles to supernatural purity. Elena finds herself at the center of an unlikely alliance that spans traditional enemy lines, as Marcus's human security team coordinates with Dr. Voss's medical staff to create defensive positions in the estate's medical wing, while vampire kings who arrived as potential rivals choose to support Adrian rather than allow Victor's radical faction to destabilize supernatural politics through violent revolution that could expose their entire species to human discovery and retaliation. King Damien of the Eastern Court abandons his previous schemes to claim power through Elena's child when faced with Victor's absolute commitment to eliminating Dampier bloodlines entirely, his pragmatic assessment concluding that Adrian's rule represents preferable stability compared to the chaos that would follow Victor's success. And even traditionally neutral vampire houses commit resources to defending the estate when they realize that failure to stop Victor's coup could result in civil war that destroys centuries of carefully maintained secrecy. The battle rages through corridors lined with priceless artwork that becomes collateral damage as supernatural strength meets modern weaponry. Vampire speed clashing with human tactical precision, while the estate's protective wards strain under assault from enemies who understand exactly how to target the mystical barriers that have protected the property for generations. Garden paths become killing fields where ancient oak trees provide cover for defenders, while attackers advance through moonlit landscapes that transform from peaceful beauty into scenes of apocalyptic violence, explosions echoing across manicured lawns as military-grade weapons create craters in topiary arrangements that took decades to achieve their perfect symmetry. Elena goes into labor as the siege reaches its most intense phase, contractions beginning with supernatural intensity that doubles her over with pain, while Dampier abilities manifest around her in ways that affect both attackers and defenders with equal unpredictability. Electromagnetic pulses disrupting communication systems and weapon targeting computers while psychic energy radiates. From her location in waves that disorient vampires, whose enhanced senses become liabilities when exposed to frequencies that exist outside normal supernatural ranges. The approaching birth creates a crisis of priority for Adrian, as he faces the impossible choice between defending his territory against enemies who seek to destroy everything he's built over centuries of careful leadership and remaining with Elena during the most dangerous moments of delivery, when his presence might mean the difference between successful birth and the death of both mother and child. His vampire nature demands that he lead from the front during battle, his strategic experience and supernatural abilities making him the most effective weapon against Victor's forces. But his love for Elena pulls him toward the medical wing, where Dr. Voss struggles to monitor a birth that defies every precedent in Dampier medical history, while supernatural energies build toward potentially catastrophic release. Marcus takes command of tactical operations with the efficiency of someone whose military training prepared him for exactly this type of crisis. His coordination of mixed vampire and human forces, creating defensive strategies that maximize their combined strengths while minimizing the traditional weaknesses that enemies might exploit, and his personal investment in protecting Elena adds emotional weight to strategic decisions that could determine the fate of everyone within the estate's embattled perimeter. Dr. Voss maintains her clinical focus despite explosions that shake the medical wing's foundations and power fluctuations that threaten to shut down equipment essential for monitoring Elena's supernatural pregnancy. Her centuries of experience with vampire physiology proving invaluable as she adapts standard delivery procedures to accommodate Dampier requirements that exist outside normal medical parameters. The baby's emerging abilities create phenomena that transcend anything recorded in previous Dampier births, energy manifestations that ripple through the estate's structure while affecting electronic systems and supernatural wards with equal intensity, suggesting that this child possesses power levels that could reshape the balance between species if it survives the violence surrounding its entry into a world where its very existence represents hope for some and existential threat for others. Elena's labor transcends every medical precedent, as contractions build with supernatural intensity that seems to draw power directly from the earth beneath the estate. Each wave of pain accompanied by electromagnetic pulses that ripple through the building's structure, while the baby's emergence approaches like a cosmic event that will fundamentally alter the nature of reality for everyone present in the medical wing. Dr. Voss monitors vital signs that fluctuate beyond the capacity of her equipment to measure accurately. Vampire medical knowledge, combining with centuries of experience to guide her through a delivery that exists outside established parameters for either human or supernatural births, and she calls upon reserves of skill developed through lifetimes of treating impossible cases, while praying to deities both ancient and modern, that her expertise proves sufficient for this moment that could define the future of vampire-human relations. The psychic wave that accompanies the baby's first breath explodes outward from Elena's location with the force of a supernatural tsunami, temporarily granting every human within a mile radius the ability to see through the veils that normally hide supernatural society from mortal perception. and security guards who spent months protecting vampires without truly understanding their nature suddenly witness the elegant predators they've served alongside, while medical staff observe the intricate magical protections that have kept the estate safe from threats, both mundane and mystical. Adrian experiences the birth through their psychic connection with intensity that nearly overwhelms his vampire senses, feeling Elena's pain as if it were his own, while sharing the indescribable moment when new life emerges into existence, carrying both their genetic heritage and supernatural potential that could reshape the balance of power between species. And tears of joy stream down his face as he watches their daughter take her first breath in a world that will challenge her existence while celebrating her unprecedented survival. The baby emerges with physical characteristics that blend human and vampire traits in ways that defy biological logic, yet create perfect harmony. Her tiny fangs already visible as she instinctively searches for nourishment, while her enhanced reflexes allow her to track movement with the predatory grace of a natural-born hunter, and the rapid healing ability that closes minor birth trauma within minutes of delivery suggests regenerative powers that exceed even full vampire capabilities. Elena's survival defies every historical precedent recorded in vampire medical archives, her human determination and fierce maternal love somehow providing the strength necessary to endure supernatural demands that killed previous mothers despite their genetic advantages and medical support. And Dr. Voss documents the birth with wonder that borders on religious reverence as she witnesses the impossible made manifest through willpower and devotion that transcends species boundaries. The baby bonds immediately with both parents through psychic connections that feel different from traditional vampire mental links, creating a harmonious triad of consciousness that allows them to share emotions and sensations while maintaining individual autonomy, and her presence generates a supernatural calm that pacifies even the most violent vampires engaged in battle throughout the estate, as her aura of peace radiates outward like ripples on still water. Luna, as they name her in honor of the moonlight that blessed her birth, represents something entirely new in supernatural evolution, a Dhampir whose hybrid nature achieves perfect balance rather than creating the instability that typically characterizes mixed heritage. And her existence opens possibilities for vampire-human relations that seemed impossible just hours earlier when species barriers appeared insurmountable, and cooperation felt like naive idealism rather than achievable reality. 3 months after Luna's miraculous birth, Elena and Adrian navigate the complex challenges of raising a supernatural child while rebuilding political alliances that were strained by Victor's failed coup and the revelations that emerged during the siege that transformed their private family crisis into a public referendum on the future of vampire leadership and interspecies cooperation. Their relationship has evolved into true partnership based on mutual respect and shared responsibility, rather than the power imbalance that initially defined their connection, with Elena contributing medical expertise and human perspective to decisions that affect thousands of supernatural beings, while Adrian provides political protection and resources that allow their unconventional family to flourish despite continued opposition from conservative factions within vampire society. Elena completes her nursing degree through an accelerated program that Adrian funds with generous donations to the university. Her studies now focused on supernatural medical care that bridges the gap between human healthcare and vampire physiology. And her unique experience as the first human to successfully bear Dhampir offspring makes her invaluable as both practitioner and researcher in a field that barely existed before Luna's birth, created new medical specialties. The estate undergoes transformation from fortress to sanctuary as word spreads through supernatural communities about the successful vampire-human partnership that produced a thriving Dhampir child, drawing other mixed couples who seek guidance and support while navigating relationships that challenge traditional boundaries and face opposition from both species who view intermarriage as dangerous experimentation with genetic purity. Elena serves as both medical consultant and living proof that such relationships can survive and thrive despite seemingly impossible obstacles, her presence providing hope for other humans who love supernatural partners, while her expertise helps couples understand the medical implications of cross-species reproduction that extends far beyond traditional pregnancy concerns. The gardens that once represented the boundaries of Elena's captivity now serve as peaceful spaces where she walks freely with Luna cradled against her chest, the baby's supernatural senses already engaging with her environment through enhanced perception that allows her to track scents and sounds beyond normal infant capabilities, while her parents marvel at each new development in abilities that blend human adaptability with vampire strength. Adrian joins them for evening strolls that have become cherished family traditions, his ancient features softened by paternal devotion as he watches his daughter discover the world with curiosity, untempered by the fear and prejudice that typically shape supernatural childhoods. And their conversations during these walks range from mundane parenting concerns to profound discussions about the kind of future they want to build for Luna and others like her. The windows of their home stand open to the night air for the first time since Elena's arrival, no longer sealed against escape attempts, but welcoming the outside world into spaces that have transformed from prison to haven through choices made freely, rather than circumstances imposed through manipulation or desperation. And the fresh breeze that flows through their rooms carries sense of possibility rather than confinement. Elena's reflection in the nursery window shows a woman transformed not by vampire magic or supernatural compulsion, but by love that grew from honest interaction, courage that emerged through facing impossible challenges, and the fierce maternal determination to protect what matters most, even when protection requires standing against forces that seem infinitely more powerful than human will or determination. The silver ink glows briefly as Elena signs a new contract establishing a medical foundation dedicated to supporting supernatural families, her signature flowing across parchment with the confidence of someone who understands exactly what she's agreeing to and why her commitment matters, not just for her own family, but for countless others who will follow the path she and Adrian have blazed through previously uncharted territory. This time, the magic that binds them together through supernatural law emerges from choice rather than desperation. Their partnership cemented by shared values and common goals rather than financial necessity or political expediency. And the foundation they create will serve as Elena's legacy to a world where love transcends species boundaries and hope proves stronger than centuries of prejudice and fear.